Time for a tour of Reynolds, Alberta Museum, the main area. This place was started by one man's obsession with collecting, as most museums are, but what makes this place special is it's a testament to, the human spirit and, man's ingenuity. And some of the best displays are like right at the entrance as they show, exactly how machines work. All the machines here will use at least one or more of these simple machines to work, right? Yeah, you gonna help. This place is so packed full of machines. Like, I've had to go to this museum at least 8 times. It was like our de facto school field trip. So that's probably why I got a bit of nostalgia for it. Even when the school tried to take us other places, it would end up raining, so we'd come here.
Okay, I get it. Wedges are awesome. All right. Oh yeah, the wheel and axle. That's where life's at. Ooh, and the screw, baby. Woo, effort. And the pulley. Okay, I get it, screw. Sheesh. Holy screw. Just taking out the whole show, are you?
And despite having come here, uncountable amount of times, I always find something different or something I haven't actually noticed before. And that's part of the reason I actually wanted to comb through and film so much of it. That way I could go home and, actually go through it all.
How about a chair with a wheel?
So this is one of the plaques I really wanted to read. Treadmills used animals walking on an angled revolving tread to produce power. Gearing transferred the tread's motion to the wheel on the side of the treadmill, making the wheel rotate. A belt placed around this wheel carried the treadmill's power to the machine being operated. It seems like this would have been a lot of work getting a horse to cooperate. If you ask me. I don't think they would have done it. Just like this cat isn't cooperating with me now. What is horsepower? James Watt, an 18th century Scottish inventor, standardized the measurement of power. He found that one good draft horse could pull 165 pounds, 200 feet in 1 minute. Bit of a mouthful, that one. 1906 must have been a pretty exciting time for Albertans as some started getting cars licensed. But with any new invention comes new skepticism, like in this example letter of people at the time. Dear William, your mother writes to say that you are thinking of getting a motor car to make your way around your practice. I'm afraid, dear boy, you may be making a serious mistake. We already have a few of those machines on our streets here. They are nothing but a nuisance and a dangerous one at that. The noise, the stink, and worst of all, the clouds of dust they create are intolerable. And you have your own safety to think about. I can't count the numbers of times I nodded off on my way home from a late night house call. Bess and Blackie always bring me safely to my own gate. No, my boy, the motor car will never replace a reliable team and a comfortable Democrat. Yours affectionately, Uncle Desmond. Well, some were hesitant. By 1911, there were 1,500 registered cars in our province. First speed limit set at 16 kilometers an hour in settled areas and double that anywhere else. So to think people complain nowadays about having to go 35 in a playground zone, that's still faster than that limit. One of the more surprising parts about buying a car at that time was the sheer amount of choices. So let's have a listen to these 3 pitches and let me know in the comments which car you would buy. The case for your electric vehicle can be made by any city resident who has put up with the noise and stink of a steam or gasoline-powered auto. or has had the uncomfortable and dangerous experience of riding in either. No one who has seen the aftermath of a steam boiler explosion or suffered a broken arm while attempting to crank start a gasoline motor car would choose anything but an electric one. The electric car is silent, smooth running, clean, and so easy to operate that any member of the family can run one. There's no awkward fumbling with clutch or transmission, no dangerous building up of steam in a boiler, and no bone-rattling vibrations from backfiring engines. It's no accident that the largest selling car in America has been the steam-powered locomobile. 1,600 were sold in 1900 alone. When you consider the steam-powered cars sold by other manufacturers, many hundreds more would be added to that total. The steamer has indeed had some competition from the electric car, which, although shockingly overpriced, may be adequate for little trips around town, but for real performance, the smart buyer wants a steam car. Steam power has driven the great trains, ocean ships, and the industries of Europe and North America for decades. It is only logical that a more refined version would be the choice of automobile buyer. The steam engine is easy to start, smooth running, and quiet, unlike the gasoline-powered contraptions. The steam motors take even the steepest hills in stride and can run all day with just a few stops to take on fuel and water. Of course, operating the boiler and valves takes a little skill, but the modern driver will find this a welcome challenge, and a mastery of the engineering a great source of satisfaction. The internal combustion engine is a power plant of the future. Efficient and self-contained, it can run on common gasoline available anywhere. The power comes from the firing of a mixture of fuel and air ignited by a spark. There's some noise and vibration in the operation of this engine, of course, but it's a small price to pay for the satisfying performance. The driver of a gasoline-powered car does not have to start each trip with a 20-minute wait for a boiler to build up enough steam to get the engine going. Nor must he, like those hampered by electric motors, have to plan his trip according to the location of battery charging stations. The gasoline automobile runs through sand, mud, or snow, and has the power to get you where you are going at a good clip. The gasoline car must have been difficult to defend. It belched smoke, made a terrifying noise, could be difficult to brake, stalled often, and cranking the engine to start was frustrating and just plain dangerous. By contrast, the steam and electric cars seemed to offer far more promise. They were cleaner and quieter, and seemed most of the electric cars' drawbacks would be solved with just adding some charging stations, much like today. At least for city driving, they made perfect sense. The phenomenal popularity of low-priced gasolines like Ford's Model T, introduced in 1908, began to tip the scales in favor of gasoline. In 1912, the electric starter was introduced for gas engines, banishing that annoying crank forever.
Oh, I can see you turning them. Oh yeah, the wheels are moving.
One of my favorite parts of the Reynolds Museum is actually being able to explore, the iconic symbol that is the prairie, and that is, of course, the grain elevator. They've pretty well got a full, well-sized grain elevator in there with a 1928 Graham's Brothers 2-ton truck that was used on a farm in St. Albert. This truck was fitted with a grain tank by the farmer, who added additional sideboards that increased its carrying capacity by an additional ton. Since the truck had a 6-cylinder engine, it was able to carry the load easily, especially after the farmer further modified it by removing the hood side panels to improve cooling.
It hasn't kept that in the main building because of all the grain dust. All it takes is one spark and the whole elevator can explode. This is the goose walk. Under here is the power transmission to the elevator, where the belts and pulleys make the rest of the operation work. Hi, Charlie.
What has to be one of the best parts of the museum is the number of things you're actually allowed to touch and interact with, and while still having great practical examples of how machines work. This part shows how mechanical advantage makes work easier. The first part is just deadlifting the weight, and then you get to compare that to adding a simple ramp. Or a wheel and axle. Or a lever. My favorite, the pulley. And everybody's favorite, the screw. The place is really crazy, basically having a full period style street indoors with the best feature of all, lights you can play with. But before we hit the road with our 1955 Chevy Nomad, we better stop at the corner of gas to fill up. And while you're at the corner of gas, make sure to top up your oil, as they have a wide assortment of every type of oil you could need. Well, I suppose before we actually hit the road, we should actually build a road first. And that's best done with the 1928's Adams mode grader at the time. And this bad boy comes loaded with features like the engine can be hand cranked from either side to allow the tilt of the blade, and a spring-loaded floor with the cab to reduce the vibration, which you'd want when tackling Alberta's temperamental dirt roads, which are great when dry, but are become a pretty slippery mess when they're wet. This made finding a solution important, and Dr. Clark led the way in investigating if a mixture of heavy oil and sand called tar sand make a suitable road surfacing material. He hoped the bitumen and the tar sands would give the road surface stability when wet. Working in his lab at the U of A, Clark and his team found that they could separate the bitumen from sand with a mixture of hot water and that tar sand. In the fall of 1923, his team of researchers worked bitumen into a section of road just outside of Edmonton. The road was inspected the following spring, and while it was found to be hard and stable, it was also found to be way too expensive for practical use. Alright, so now that we got a road to drive on, we can finally purchase an auto, and in the earliest years, most cars were shipped by rail. But by 1911, there was close to 30 dealerships province-wide, and tractor manufacturers like Case and International made cars in those days and sold them through their agents as well. Alright, well, it looks like we've arrived at our destination. Let's chill out and watch a movie for a little bit.
The show starts in 2 minutes. The show starts in 1 minute.
Now we can head on over to the machine shed of mysteries, which is full of objects used on farms. So let me know in the comments if you can name any of these. I confess I don't know very many of them. There's maybe a jack in there, definitely a hand drill, and one I've got a lot of experience with, a baby chicken feeder. And then right after this area is something I can really relate to, is getting to school in the winter, which was a pain 20 years ago, let alone 100 years ago, I can imagine. And for many children across rural Alberta, they used horse-drawn cabooses to get to school. And the caboose would pick up children, much like a modern-day bus, only looking more like a shack on a sleigh. And some were home-built, while others were, built by blacksmiths or carriage makers, and they were out of wood or metal. All had windows and all were cold, apparently. Even the ones that had heaters, to the point that students and their lunch pails had to be thawed out by the wood stoves in the schoolroom. It wasn't until 1935 before Alberta's main highways were even plowed regularly, which made travel so difficult most motorists just opted for putting the car in storage or up on blocks, and then they'd get out the sleigh. Motorists could even turn their license in and get a partial refund for the year. Imagine having to do this, all right? At night, the driver would bring the battery in, keep it behind the stove, and when they were getting ready to leave in the morning, they would take the hot coals from the stove to place under the oil pan, and then have to pour hot oil into their radiator. After all of this, you're still pretty lucky if your car would start. After the snow melted, it was time for the farmers to clear the brush with stump pullers. And even then, this newly broken land couldn't be seeded until it was worked into a smoother, flatter surface. For the average farm family, this meant seemingly endless trips back and forth across the fields, plowing, disking, harrowing, rolling, and packing, gradually working the soil into a seedbed. Quote from Barbara Slater, who settled near Stoppington, recounted, "Every afternoon I've been driving 4 horses on the disc. George discs on the plowed sod, then rolls it, then I'm allowed to disc. For by that time the ground is fairly level and there isn't so great a danger being jerked off. Back and forth, monotonous but so important." Discs are a kind of round metal plow bottom that started the job of breaking up the large turned furrows. Furrows, basically like a trench. The discs could be set to run straight or at an angle and help to cut up and mix the soil and surface vegetation. When it comes to harrows, settlers could choose from a number of different kinds. They were wooden or metal frames set with teeth or tines that broke up lumps of earth and uprooted weed seedlings. Rollers were the first kinds of rockers to flatten the soil turned up by breaking, and by 1915, multi-bottomed packers were common. Once the ground got cleared, they could get to plowing, like the one that plowed this field by Camrose native Oscar Hugh in 1915, or with a Van Slyke plow that was manufactured in Edmonton. Now that the plowing was done, the planting could begin, and preparing the seed with fanning mills, which were hand-cranked machines that separated weed and diseased seeds from healthy kernels by a series of vibrating screens with various sized openings. And at the last screen, a small fan with a chain from the hand crank removed dirt and any lightweight seeds that made it through. The seed was often stored by pickling it in a formaldehyde and water solution, or by mixing the grain with copper or mercurial dust. When people first settled, it was still common to broadcast seeds, but as time went on, farmers switched to grain drills that opened up a furrow and dropped the seed right in and covered it back up. A lot like this seed drill that was designed for use with a tractor, but was used with a team of 4 horses up until 1940. At that time, it was finally fitted with a tractor and still used up into the 1970s. The next big step, of course, came the harvest, and hay was cut with a horse-drawn mower, which was essentially a 2-wheeled cart with a long serrated cutter bar, and that was about 5 to 8 feet. And training horses to pull the mowers could be difficult since they heard an ominous whirring behind their heels. And yeah, that sounds scary to me. And for the driver, riding the mower itself was hot and bumpy, and while trying to control his horse and straining to see objects hidden in the tall grass, Hitting even just a small rock could damage the cutter bar, and a large object could jolt the horses and send the driver tumbling from his seat. Then above all that, the weather had to cooperate. As once mowing starts, you needed an uninterrupted, hot, dry weather to get that crop in. And if you were lucky and your crop didn't mold off, the binder was your next step. This would cut the grain, tie the stalks together in sheaves, and drop the sheaves to the ground. And until the widespread use of swathers and combines, getting the harvest in depended on a binder. It took a little time for combines to catch on in Alberta, as farmers were concerned over their ability to deal with an unevenly unripened crop. But this all changed in 1922 when they ran trial runs with an impressive performance that earned it the name the Prairie Schooner.
Unless there's one up there. There might be a one.
Now it has to be probably the most memorable part for me as a kid, as we used to call this the Mech Warrior tractor thing. But it's better known as the multi-pit, and it was created by Edward Snell of Edmonton in 1949, as he wanted a machine that could travel over muskeg and rough terrain. Wheeled vehicles often get bogged down in swamp-like conditions, so Snell wanted a tractor that would walk rather than roll, and the legs move independently, making the tractor walk. Snell's dream to design a machine suited to Alberta's conditions, embodies the creative spirit of Alberta's inventors and this museum.
City problem you're trying to solve. Innovation and perspiration. Try this, try that, find a solution. That's the spirit of tomorrow. That's an animated successful entrepreneurs need lonely purpose, family tree. Innovation here, innovation there. Everywhere, contraptions everywhere. Every snow if you're there as well as the multi-pit. There's still liver balls. What if I put legs on the tractor? See a problem, try to solve it. Innovation, perspiration. Try this, try that, find a solution. Now that's the spirit of tomorrow. Well, Mr. Dragon's clients never the tractor to come and work on the multi-pit tractor. They tried and failed and tried and failed. They tried living the times here. They were beauty with all those feet, ready for the ball, ready to leave. See a problem, try to solve it. Innovation, perspiration. Try this, try that, find a solution. Now that's the spirit of tomorrow. The walking tractor, a wonder to be played. Now the corporate share food service. So nothing is counted from down to Tennessee. Hey folks, come on down. Things like these open logs makes it easier to get those logs. Turn it, show. Later, the crowd will come. The last thing we'll keep the Bible stocks and the Lord's company went on the racks. try to solve it. Sweet God, try to solve it. Renovation of perspiration. Try that plan solution. Now that's the spirit of survival.
Near the end of the tour, they have an old car that's still in 2 stages of restoration that really highlights, the amount of work and love that really goes into the displays here. If you're interested in learning more and in the local area, once a year they host a 5-day course on museum quality vehicle restoration, and that workshop is in November, and you can sign up on their website there. All right, and that takes us pretty much to the end of our tour, but to arguably the most important part of it, and the most important part is dedicated to the actual man who was the original collector of all this stuff. Stan was born in 1923 in Wetaskiwin, Alberta, and at a young age worked in his father's local garage after school until 1942 when he joined the Royal Canadian Air Force, serving in Great Britain for 3 years. When he arrived home, he made his own garage and learned about fixing up cars and started selling good quality used cars, and eventually had like over 13 dealerships. Got to the point where he's collecting a lot of antique cars, and he would trade any kind of car for anything. And he's got one old sign that I loved since I was a kid of him like, "I'll even trade an elephant." And it's like, I want an elephant. But you don't. Eventually it got to the point where his collection was over 2,000 cars, 1,100 tractors, 500 trucks, 200 steam engines, 300 threshing machines, 800 stationary engines, and 125 aircraft, as well as Native American artifacts and toys, that he had collected all the way since he was a kid, growing up on the farm where he'd dig up old arrowheads and all that kind of stuff. So he eventually opened the museum on his own. It was around 1974 when he got the idea of trying to donate his collection to the government so it would be preserved for people forever to enjoy. And that led to the entire museum that's built today, which is built on a 156-acre site, and that became the largest single donation in Canada's history. Stan passed away in 2012, leaving a legacy that lives on in all those who come here to experience all these pieces of our history he left behind. So thanks for joining me on this tour. If you liked it, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and watch this video of where we went to the aviation exhibit, or check out our video on the mental health hospital of Pinocchio.